If you would, please find your way to 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 8. Anybody this month experienced fear? Things overwhelming. You didn't know how to handle it. Stuff was happening and you just couldn't really make sense of it all. You are not alone. That's everybody's experience from time to time. To tell you a story that some of you may have heard, but probably most of you have not. It'll be brand new to most of you, but it happened over a century ago. He was a professional thief. His name stirred fear throughout the desert where he terrorized Wells Fargo stage lines. For 13 years he did it, actually. Between 1875 and 1883 was when he was the most active. In journals from San Francisco to New York, his name became synonymous with the danger of the frontier. He's credited with stealing the bags from 29 different stagecoach crews. He became famous, actually, although he stole probably 29 times, he became famous because in the fourth and fifth robberies, he left a poem. He was a very well-dressed gentleman. He wore a flour sack over his head with two eyes cut, and that was part of the problem. Nobody knew who he was. He would confidently walk out to the stage line, not even riding a horse, with a big shotgun. They would stop, and he would steal everything. 29 times. People talked about the notorious thief and about how violent he was, although, interestingly enough, he never fired a shot. He was very polite. He demanded the money, but he was very polite about the way he did it. That was the issue. He was polite. He did what he was there to do, and then he took the money and he left. And he became known as Black Bart. Anybody ever heard of Black Bart before? Does anybody know the rest of the story? Black Bart was eventually captured. That's a whole other story that we're not going to take the time to go into. When the hood came off, everybody was shocked. They didn't find a bloodthirsty bandit from Death Valley. They found a mild-mannered father of four who originated from Decatur, Illinois. The reason he never fired at anybody was because he never loaded his gun. The reason that he always did the robberies on foot was because he was afraid of horses. His name was Charles E. Bowles, and the most terrifying bandit of the West was actually a scaredy cat. It's amazing how often we fear things which never happen. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever had situations that you were afraid of what was going to happen and then it just didn't happen? Anybody been there? You know what I'm talking about? The stuff that sometimes we fear the most just simply never happens at all. And sometimes it does happen, but even in those situations it doesn't turn out the way we thought it was going to. Today in the seventh message from the life of Elisha, we're going to see several people who didn't know what to do. They were overwhelmed. They couldn't make sense of things, and yet it all ended up working out. If you have found 2 Kings chapter 6, we're going to read verses 8 to 23. Follow along with me. We're going to move fairly quickly, but there's really good stuff here, folks. So let's dig into it together. When the king of Aram was at war with Israel, he would confer with his officers and say, "We will mobilize our forces at such and such a place." But immediately Elisha, the man of God, would warn the king of Israel, "Do not go near that place, for the Arameans are planning to mobilize their troops there." So the king of Israel would send word to the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he would be on the alert there. The king of Aram became very upset over this. He called his officers together and declared, "Which of you is the traitor? Who has been informing the king of Israel of my plans?" "It's not us, my lord the king," one of the officers replied. "Elisha, the prophet of Israel, tells the king of Israel even the words you speak in the privacy of your bedroom." "Go and find out where he is," the king commanded. So I sent troops to seize him. So I can send troops to seize him. And the report came back, "Elisha is in Dothan." So one night the king of Aram sent a great army with many chariots and horses to surround the city. When the servant of the man of God got up early the next morning and went outside, there were troops, horses, and chariots everywhere. "Oh, sir, what shall we do now?" the young man cried to Elisha. "Don't be afraid," Elisha told him, "for there are more on our side than on theirs." Then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, open his eyes and let him see." The Lord opened the young man's eyes, and when he looked up, he saw the hillside around Elisha was filled with horses and chariots of fire. As the Aramean army advanced toward him, Elisha prayed, "O Lord, please make them blind." So the Lord struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Then Elisha went out and told them, "You have come the wrong way. This isn't the right city. Follow me, and I will take you to the man you were looking for." And he led them to the city of Samaria. As soon as they entered Samaria, Elisha prayed, "O Lord, now open their eyes and let them see." So the Lord opened their eyes, and they discovered they were in the middle of Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he shouted to Elisha, "My father, should I kill them? Should I kill them?" "Of course not," Elisha replied. "Do we kill prisoners of war? Give them food and drink and send them home again to their master." So the king made a great feast for them and then sent them home to their master. After that, the Aramean raiders stayed away from the land of Israel. Would you pray with me? God, this is an incredible story, and I pray that you would help us to see how it relates to us. In your name I pray. Amen. I want to talk to you about God and our perspective on God and what we need to understand about Him. And let's start with this principle. It's in your notes. God sometimes does the impossible. As the story opens, Elisha is in effect being a spy for the Israelite army, because every time the king of Aram makes plans, Elisha knows. And he sends word to Israel's king and says, "Listen, don't go near this area, because if you do, they're going to attack you." So time after time after time, the Aramean king makes plans, and time after time after time, the place he plans to attack is guarded. So what happens is that with this experience, the people in Aram realize something's going on. God's protecting them because He is notifying the king of Israel what's about to happen. Now, anybody here ever had a situation in your life that you just didn't know how to handle? It was really, really overwhelming? Kind of how we started talking this morning? Let me give you this next principle. This is in your notes. Even when things look really bad to us, God is in control. God knew all about Aram. He knew exactly what was going on. He knew how to take care of the things. And because He knew the danger, He notified Elisha, who time after time tells the king. Now, probably not the first time or the second time, but eventually the king begins to suspect somebody on his staff must be letting out the private plans. Now, this is interesting. Jeff, I looked at a lot of commentaries on this passage this week, and nobody suggested what I'm getting ready to tell you. But this is what I think was going on. Aram, does that name ring a bell with anybody? Actually, remember last week's sermon, those of you who were here? Remember Naaman? Where was Naaman from? Aram. I think the king probably suspected Naaman, because Naaman had been healed by the prophet in Israel. He had promised that he was going to worship the one true God from that day forward. And so if you're looking for a leak, you look to somebody who has a connection. And Naaman had a connection, but nobody anywhere suggested that. But I still think that's probably what was kind of happening. That the king sort of suspected Naaman had to be the leak, because every time they make plans, now the other possibility is that Naaman is no longer a general by this time, because he's not mentioned. We're not told who he suspected. He just suspected somebody. And so, believing there must be a spy among them, the king of Aram asked, "Please tell me which one of you is spilling the beans." That's the Tim Richards translation. That's not in any translation, but that's really the point. Which one of you is not keeping our secrets? And finally, one of his men comes forward And he says, it's actually Elisha, the prophet of Israel. Because, King, what you are saying in your bedroom, he already knows. Because this is a man who's a great prophet. He knows everything. Again, does that sound like something Naaman might say after he has been healed by this man by dipping in a dirty river 7 times? I think it very possibly could be, but he's not identified. We don't really know that. But here's the point, and this is very practical for all of us. When things in your life look impossible, I want you to remember, God can help us when no one else can. And that's exactly what takes place here. The frustrated Aramean king rages against his own advisors. It's clear he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know what to do. And so they discover that the prophet Elisha is living in a little town called Dothan. And Dothan was about 12 miles north of the capital of Israel, which was Samaria. And that brings us to point 2. God has the power. God has power we can't imagine. So now after the king finds out that Elisha is in Dothan, this little town, he sends a big force. And we know it was a big force because there's 3 different types of soldiers identified. We're told there's the army that goes there, so there was the army. And then there were horses, which meant there were men on horseback. And there were chariots. And so there are people with chariots. So basically, he sends a big force to capture this one man because he thinks this guy's it. But God is getting ready to do something that nobody else could imagine. An incredible demonstration of God's power. They come by night, they sneak in. But I've got a question for you. I want you to think this through logically. If the prophet knows what you're saying in your most secret places, and every time you make plans, he tells the king, and suddenly the king just avoids that area, what's the flaw in the plan if you're going to send an army to attack him? He's already going to know. I mean, if everything you say, is recorded somewhere and somebody's listening to it and they catch you in your lies, then you make plans that the next time you're just going to go kill them. The flaw in the plan is they heard that too. And so they make these plans, but it's really an impressive display of force. But how's he going to send an army without Elisha knowing it if Elisha knows everything he's saying? Now, what's interesting is that when you read the story, verse 13, go and find out where he is. The king commanded, so I can send troops to seize him. And the report came back, he's in Dothan. So one night the king of Aram sent a great army with many chariots and horses to surround the city. So they've got this big army there to do it. And verse 15, the man of God gets up early in the morning and he goes outside and there's troops everywhere. And his servant says, what are we going to do? How many of you catch the terror in Elisha's attitude? You don't catch it because it's not there. Elisha knew God was in charge. He believed God could take care of him in ways that nobody else could imagine. Elisha's servant looks around and he sees that they are surrounded. There's men, there's swords, there's horses, there's chariots. In his own mind, he saw it as a battle between him and Elisha and the thousands who surrounded them. But Elisha wasn't worried. Elisha wasn't concerned. I want you to get this next statement that's in your notes because this is so very, very true. We have more resources than we realize when we rely upon God. God has the situation covered. I know some of you, because you have talked to me, have had a really bad week. Some of you are going through things that you didn't anticipate, you don't know how to handle, you don't know how you're going to deal with them. Some of you this very week have had those kinds of things happening. But I want you to know when you come to God and you rely upon God, God has resources you know nothing about. Nothing about it. I want you to look at verse 16, because there we find Elisha's first words, and the first words are to his servant who has just told him, oh, what are we going to do? His first words to the servant are, see it there? Verse 16, don't be afraid. What happens when life just goes berserk? What is our first reaction typically? We get scared, right? You lose a job. How am I going to pay the bills? You have a family member get sick. How are we going to get through this? You have a child who is making bad choices. What are we going to do? I mean, just name the situation. There's 1,000 different ones. Don't be afraid. With God's help, you have resources available to you that you absolutely don't even know you have. Don't be afraid. Did you know that exact phrase is repeated 88 times in the Bible? Don't be afraid. Think of a little shepherd boy, David, going to fight a big, ornery giant named Goliath. 9 feet, 9 inches tall. The guy's a monster. Everybody else in the whole nation of Israel is scared of him except a little shepherd boy named David, because he wasn't afraid. Because he knew God was with him. In fact, that's the significant thing. In almost all of these situations where we are told that God says, don't be afraid, the next thing he says is, I am with you. Let me give you some examples. Don't look these up. We're just going to put them on the screen. Let me share 3 scriptures with you in rapid succession. Genesis 26:24. The Lord appeared to him on the night of his arrival. I am the God of your father, Abraham. He said, do not be afraid. Read those next words with me out loud. For I am with you and will bless you. Jeremiah 42:11. Do not fear the king of Babylon anymore, says the Lord, for I am with you. I will save you and rescue you from his power. 2 Chronicles 32:7. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria or his mighty army, for there is a power far greater on our side. In other words, I'm with you. I've got you covered. That's the reason Elisha wasn't discouraged and disturbed by this situation. Okay. I'm good again? Okay. It's interesting that Elisha didn't ask God to protect them. Did you notice that? He didn't say, God, protect us. And the reason he didn't ask God to protect them was because of something that had already happened. Look back at the story again, verse 17. Then Elisha prayed, O Lord, open his eyes and let him see. What was the young servant supposed to see? Was he supposed to see that Elisha was confident? No, that wasn't it at all. What he was supposed to see was what Elisha already could see. They're standing outside and the kid says, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And Elisha doesn't say, don't worry, God's with us. He says, God, open his eyes so he can see what I can already see. And they look around the hills, and there are chariots of fire surrounding the entire city. Here's a question. Were the chariots already there before the young man saw them? Yes, they were already there. Here's the deal, folks. You and I often don't see what God's doing to take care of us, but he is always there. It's not usually going to be visible as chariots of fire, but don't make any mistake of thinking that just because you and I don't see them with our human eyes, that they're not already there. You will never, ever encounter a situation in your life, but that God is already there. I don't know what difficulties you're going to encounter, but I know you and I will encounter difficulties. It's part of life, is it not? But God is already there. He already has his angels there. His Spirit is already working. He is already there. I don't know how He's going to solve your dilemma. I don't know what He's going to do, but He is there. In fact, let me give you a scripture that just kind of puts it in the right perspective. This one actually has a blank attached to it. It's in your notes. What can we say about such wonderful things as these? If God is for us, who can be against us? Can I put that in my language? If God's on your side, it doesn't matter what else is happening. It really doesn't. The issue isn't ultimately what's going on around you. I mean, you still have to do your part. But your part's not God's part. There are things that you and I can't do. You know, if you've lost your job, put in applications, work, do it. But ultimately, God knows what's going on. And if you don't get a job quickly, maybe He's teaching you lessons. And it's easy for me to say because I'm not unemployed right now. But I've been through things too. If you can't handle it, you keep going to God, you keep doing what you're supposed to do, and then there's a part of it that God does that you and I can't do. The challenge for us is how do we keep our eyes on God and handle what's going on around us? I want to tell you about a fish. Go ahead and put it up there. Anybody ever seen this fish before? I guarantee you won't catch it locally. This is a fish that lives in Central and South America. It's one of the most unique fish on the planet. What I want you to focus on for just a second is its eye. Oh, thank you. Right there. Can you see the picture well enough to see that there's a line across the middle of the eye? This fish is so weird because that line that you see is bifocals. This fish swims on the surface, and its eyes are able to see what's above it, as well as what's below it in the water. Now think about that for a second as a spiritual application. Normally, what do we focus on? What we see around us, right? In fact, we get all upset about all the stuff that's going on that we can see with our human eyes. But having said that, what's above us is infinitely greater than what we see, isn't it? I mean, think about a fish. Even a fish swimming in the deepest ocean, there's about 5 miles of water under it. And how far does space go above it? 10 miles? 10 billion miles? You're not even touching it. 100 trillion billion miles. You're not touching it. What's up there is infinitely greater than what's underneath. We always look and we see only what we can see with our eyes. The advantage of this fish is it sees what's around it, but it also sees what's above it. That's the challenge for those of us as Christians. To realize that what we see is not the full picture. God's always doing things bigger than you and I see. There's more going on than we ever comprehend. If you find yourself in tough situations, don't panic, don't give up. God's got you covered. He's got your back, as we say. He knows what's going on. Now, does that mean things are not going to get hard? That is not at all what I said. But I'm telling you, you're never in a situation where He is not there. Ever. Final principle. God often works in surprising ways. God gave Elisha a much better plan than any of us would have come up with. This army is around them, and they're coming forward, and Elisha prays. He said, God, make them blind. Did you notice the title? When God made blind eyes see. His servant had been blind, spiritually speaking, and He opened up his eyes. And now He takes a group of people who are physically able to see, and He blinds them. And then He goes out to them, and He says, can I show you where you need to go? And they followed Him 12 miles from Dothan to Samaria, They're attacking Israel. They're attacking Israel's prophet. He leads them 12 miles to Samaria. Anybody know anything significant about Samaria? It's the capital of Israel. He leads them into the capital city. And once they get in the capital city, look at verse 20. As soon as they had entered Samaria, Elisha prayed, "O Lord, now open their eyes and let them see." And if you look back to verse 17, look at how close that exact statement is to what he said, what he prayed to the Lord. Then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, open his eyes and let him see." Almost the exact same phrase. The point was, whether God is opening the eyes of someone following him or opening the eyes of someone not following him, he's still at work in their lives. In fact, look at this next statement in your notes. God sometimes demonstrates his power by working in our lives even when we are not close to him. You ever been away from God and yet God was still at work in your life? You weren't following closely, but he still was working? I'm telling you, God's God. And he wants us to follow him, and he will do more in your life when you're following him. But God's God. God's sovereign. He doesn't need your permission to work in his life. He's God. And this Armenian army that has been sent out to find the prophet who keeps telling the king has just demonstrated that, can I just be really blunt? You don't mess with God. That's really what it boils down to. You don't mess with God. I mean, you just don't. God's patient, but you know what? You don't mess with God. I mean, he demonstrates it time and time and time again in this story. And there's something going on here that really sets the stage, that shows that God's way is always better than our way. Verse 21, when the king of Israel saw them, he shouted to Elisha, "My father, should I kill them? Should I kill them? Here's the enemy. They have been delivered to him on a silver platter." And he says, "Should I just kill them?" Verse 22, Elisha says, "Of course not. That's not the right way to handle it. He said you wouldn't kill prisoners of war." I want you to just think of all the weird dynamics of this story. Imagine that you see the #1 prophet accompanying an entire army up to the gates of the capital city. The guards, apparently, are so taken back that they just open up the gates and let them in. Once they get inside, the king says, "Should we kill him?" Elisha says, "No, don't kill him. Instead," look at verse 21, 22 there. "Of course not. We don't kill prisoners of war. Give them food and drink and send them home." This is wise on so many different levels. Because once you ate with someone in their house, it was considered a peace treaty. So once you ate with someone, you were no longer allowed to attack them. It's the way the culture worked. But ultimately, this was all pointing back to who? Not Elisha. It was pointing back to Elisha's God, Israel's God. Now, one of the problems with incredible stories like this is it's hard for us to look at it and see it, but let me give you one final principle that really relates, and this will also be true in your life and mine. God works in ways that ultimately always bring glory to himself. What's going on in your life may not make sense. It may be frustrating to you, but if you give it time, God can use what you're experiencing to bring glory to himself. How? I don't know. Because it's not between you and me. It's between God and you.